Right.
Martin, I believe you mentioned that the family business was cattle dealing. When did you first feel the effect of the Nazis in an economic sense?
There was no effect really until the Nazis came to power in 1933. The first benchmark was April 1st, 1933, which
Why was
was
that?
It was the day of the boycott. The Nazis decided to boycott all Jewish businesses, particularly effective against retail stores. In our town, the 4 leading department stores were Jewish-owned and were greatly affected by this boycott. Now, we had been told by some connection we still had with the police that there were some intentions as a demonstration to imprison my father and myself, because my father was the president of the Jewish community and I was a leader of a Zionist youth group. So we thought it would be better if we would leave before that day, and we went to Berlin. However, something very strange happened at our place of business. Usually our customers did not come to our place of business. We used to go to them. But on that day, there was a constant parade of cars as an obvious demonstration of their loyalty to our firm. We didn't feel very comfortable about it.
I'm sure you didn't.
But
sure your family
nothing
didn't.
ever happened afterwards.
How did the Nuremberg laws, the terrible Nuremberg laws, the real turning point, I think, in the history of the Nazi onslaught, how did they affect you and your family?
Well, I think that the Nuremberg laws taught us that the end of the line was there.
Can you mention some of the Nuremberg laws, just to refresh our memories?
The Nuremberg laws, first of all, cancelled the citizenship of any Jew in Germany. He was not anymore a citizen of Germany, he became a subject of Germany. So he had no civil rights anymore. The Nuremberg law also had a very, very strong sexual overtone. Sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews was punishable by death.
Yes.
But I would like to mention something here.
Please.
The Nazi propaganda always had a very strong sexual overtone. The papers like the Stürmer were nothing else but pornographic sheets.
Yes.
Showing the old, wild, dirty, ugly Jew violating that beautiful, lithe, blonde German girl. And it was described in great detail and eaten up, particularly by young people. By the way, the movie Judgment at Nuremberg, I think, with Judy Garland, depicts that kind of atmosphere very well.
Yes, I recall that, yes.
So, to continue now with the Nuremberg laws, for example, one provision of the Nuremberg laws was that a Jew could not employ female household help under the age of 45. Again, that sexual overtone and that, well, as far as the reaction of my own family was to this laws was that I think my parents and my parent generation realized that life for our generation, for the younger generation, was impossible, because the damage done, even if the Nazis would disappear overnight, the damage done to the Jew as a human being was so great that we felt that I could not live anymore in Germany. But my parents felt that economically they would be able to end their life in peace, and they were satisfied, or they were reconciled, I should say, to the fact that we would leave, build up a new life, and they would stay and live out their life in Germany.
Even as late as 1935, 1936. Let me ask you, we've kind of passed over the year 1936. We're coming closer to your year of emigration, 1937. I recall, of course, as the world does, that the Olympics were held in Berlin in 1936, and we recall those so vividly the pictures of Hitler on the one hand and the very courageous and brilliant Jesse Owens. Now, you were in Germany at that moment. How did you feel about it? Tell us something about the Olympics of 1936, but I'm more interested in your feelings as you recall.
I personally, and I think most of my friends and my family, felt terribly disappointed that the world would come to Germany after the Nuremberg laws had been enacted, after the Nazis had shown their real color and participate in the festivities. For a while, the Nazis tried to tone down the anti-Jewish propaganda during the time of the Olympics. Signs which said Juden verboten, I mean Jews prohibited, or Jews not allowed here, disappeared, particularly in the larger cities. At that time, we already had signs in parks, on benches, not allowed for Jews. These signs disappeared. But they reappeared very fast after the Olympics were over.
After the foreign people had gone.
We felt very strongly that the world wanted to be fooled. And it was one of the great disappointments.
I'm thinking now about your being a young man, and now is the moment for you to emigrate. What were the difficulties in emigrating? This is 1937 now, and your family decided that your future would be elsewhere, would be in the United States, which was your choice. What were the problems you had in arranging your emigration?
Let me, I like to broaden this a little bit.
Please.
In 1933, when the boycott occurred first, I remember very distinctly, even today, LaGuardia in New York.
Mayor LaGuardia,
Mayor
yes.
LaGuardia, who spoke out very strongly and became one of the most hated men in Nazi Germany. And also Roosevelt, who spoke out. And we were aware of helping hands on the individual basis. But when it came to the actual immigration, we ran up against the bureaucracy and red tape and the worldwide depression. And there was no country in the world which really wanted us. And it was a terrible shock, because no country was willing to change their laws, to make it possible to come. South American countries used it as a means of receiving bribes. The English mandate in Palestine started restricting the issuance of so-called certificates, which made it very difficult to go to Palestine. And the United States strictly adhered to their quota system, which was, I believe, 25,000 a year.
I think it was.
For Germany. But beyond that, there were anti-Semitic overtones in American consulates, particularly in Berlin. And the one in Stuttgart was known as selling visas. I decided that in order not to endanger my visa, that I would move to Hamburg, because the Hamburg consul was known as being very sympathetic. So I moved the last 6 months of my stay in Germany. My official residence was Hamburg, and I left from Hamburg.
And you had a relative here, I assume, who was able to sign an affidavit.
We had very helpful relatives.
Very helpful to you.
Extremely helpful.
Martin, I want very much for you to tell us, after you left in 37, then Kristallnacht came in November of 1938, and what happened to the rest of your family, those who remained in Germany?
Well, my brother, I have a younger brother and I have a younger sister. My brother had left before me, so the only male member of my immediate family was my father, who, by the way, who had been as I mentioned before, who had been the president of the Jewish community. Now, the Nazis had already started pushing for immigration very strongly.
They wanted to get rid of their Jews. They wanted to get rid of their
Jews. And there was one place open in the world where Jews could go, and that was Shanghai. So they loaded as many Jews as they could on boats going to Shanghai, even before the Kristallnacht, and even more so after. And they had come to my father and asked him to prepare a list of people who should go to Shanghai from our community. And my father refused.
He didn't want to make the choice to play God.
He absolutely refused to do it. And he told me later on that he expected to go to the concentration camp for it, but he didn't. They just left him alone. They appointed what we would call today a Quisling, and he became his successor and died in the concentration camp. And so when Kristallnacht came, my father was arrested, like all the other Jewish men, and spent about 3 weeks in the concentration camp of Buchenwald, and then was released on his promise to leave. And they left shortly before the outbreak of World War II, 1939.
Have you ever been back to Germany, Martin?
Yes, I was back twice. I was back in 1958 primarily to settle restitution matters for my family. And I took my children back in 1976 to show him the graves of our forefathers.
Martin Mainzer started life in a very normal way, certainly normal by today's standards. He went to school, he had friends, he participated in Jewish activities, and he looked forward to taking his place in his family's community. But gradually, everything changed for him and for the world. The Holocaust started slowly and in subtle ways. It didn't spring into being overnight. It was a planned dehumanizing of the Jews, which proceeded with relentless force under the guise of German legality. When the Nazis passed the Nuremberg laws, they did so in complete disregard of all human values. German Jews were not timid, but when they tried to defend themselves through the courts, they were stymied. Month after month and year after year, they became more constrained and less able to resist. And then those who could left. As Raoul Hilberg writes in his book, The Destruction of European Jewry, and as Martin Mainzer has clearly demonstrated, the Holocaust started as an administrative process. First, the social isolation of the Jews, then propaganda, then economic boycott, and then anti-Jewish laws, and ultimately destruction. I want to thank you, Martin, for sharing your experiences and your insights with us. I'm Marilyn Tallman for Witness.